You're listening to the Professional Adjunct Podcast, episode PA028. Hello, friends. You're listening to the Professional Adjunct Podcast, brought to you by Faculty Focus. Here we share ideas about teaching students in the classroom, online, and blended learning environments. On this show, we will discuss strategies for teaching with the purpose of becoming more effective at what we do. Let's get started. On today's episode, we continued our conversation with Dr. Kristen Wall of Colorado Christian University. And specifically, we discuss her dissertation on how at-risk adult students perceive faculty feedback. I think you will find this interesting, especially considering how much of an impact we as faculty have on our students and how important feedback is to them. Dr. Kristen Jensen Wall is the Director of Faculty Development at Colorado Christian University, a private Christian university in Lakewood, Colorado. Her role includes providing professional development for approximately 600 adjunct faculty, as well as scheduling courses and contracting faculty for almost 1,700 classes per year. So with that, let's join our conversation with Dr. Wall.
You just recently finished your dissertation for at-risk adult student perceptions of faculty feedback. And I know that a lot of faculty are a little uncomfortable when we start talking about student evaluations of instructors. Mm-hmm. So give me kind of an overview of where that idea came from.
Sure.
And how that all started.
Sure. So I was in the midst of my doctoral program, and it came time to start thinking about dissertations and, what is my topic? What am I interested in? And I was, at the same time, developing a faculty development seminar on how to grade a paper and how to provide appropriate feedback. And it struck me in the midst of preparing for this seminar that we have never really asked the students what's helpful to them. We've never really spent a lot of time asking the students, what do you need? What do you want? What are the areas that you perceive that you need help with?
We've always approached it, we're the experts, we'll tell you what you need.
Exactly. And it doesn't acknowledge an adult student's prior life experience. More than likely, they've received some feedback at some point in their life about their writing. They walk in the door with some assumptions about what they need to work on. It might be helpful as faculty members and as a university to find out what their assumptions are walking in and what they think they need to work on. And we know, it's well documented in the research that adult students have anxiety about writing. So maybe asking the students ahead of time might help to alleviate some of that anxiety as they sit down to write their papers. And so that morphed into a dissertation about how at-risk adult students perceive the faculty feedback. I had a small population of 8 students, but it was cross-disciplinary, a vast age range. I think the youngest was 22 and the oldest was 58. They all had different majors, different life experience, and they gave me some pretty consistent feedback about our feedback. They provided really they had strong opinions. They had definite ideas about what they wanted, what the faculty members were doing well, and what the faculty members need to improve.
So you got a wide range from almost millennials to the baby boomers. Mm-hmm. So, and you also mentioned something about not only a different generational issue, but linear versus non-linear or non-sequential learners. Was there a difference there as well?
Yeah, that wasn't something that I was pursuing. It wasn't one of my research questions, but it came out in the course of the conversations with the participants, and then it's been reinforced multiple times since then in the classes that I've taught, that, and I'm guessing on this age, but it just seems like roughly about the age of 40, if you are older than 40, your educational experience probably did not expose you to mind maps, for instance. And mind maps are a non-linear way to organize your thoughts and to prepare for your paper. And at CCU, we encourage students to experiment and to try an outline and to try a mind map. And the students in my study, a couple of them said that was life-changing. That was a really, really big deal. It felt like finally there was a tool that made sense for the way that I write and the way that I work.
The way that I think in the writing world they call them outliners and pantsers. So
sure.
Mind map would go right along with those that just need to get it all down.
Yeah. And so since I finished my dissertation, I've started teaching again. And so I've kind of done some informal polling of students and asked them, have you ever been exposed to mind maps, or what was your response? And both online students and in-seat students reported, I have never seen this before, and it's much more helpful to me than an outline. As a teacher and as a student myself, mind maps are not how I work. I'm an outliner.
I'm the way.
And so I struggle to help students who don't outline. And so as a teacher, having the mind map as a resource was also tremendously helpful, because then I could say, well, okay, outlines aren't working for you. Let's try the mind map. And generally, students are very responsive to that. If nothing else, they appreciate having a couple of different options to play with and to try out.
It's more fun, too.
Yeah.
Even though I'm an outliner, but if I'm just playing around, I can do the mind maps.
Sure.
I have to be in the right frame of mind.
Sure. Well, and a couple of years ago, we had a new dean who was developing some courses for us, and he had never seen a mind map before. And someone introduced him to the idea, and I mean, you should have seen, he had colors, he had arrows, he had multiple pages that had to be taped together. They were massive mind maps, and he just said, this has completely changed the way that I work. And as an educator, I can't help but feel a certain sense of satisfaction. I wasn't the one that introduced the concept to him, but it certainly, as I'd go down to the copy room and see him taping all these pieces of paper together, and he just looked so happy, I just thought, oh, that's why we do what we do,
Now, does that translate into kind of how they like to have their feedback as well? Was there any connection there?
I didn't explore that at all. No, unfortunately, my current joke is that one dissertation could spawn another 100 dissertations, because for every question that you think you've answered, there's another 1,000 that haven't. So that's definitely worth exploring.
Well, let's get back to the questions that you did answer. And I know that you came up with 5 themes.
Yes.
Okay. Let's kind of talk through those a little bit.
Sure. So just to give some context, my study was a qualitative case study. I had 8 participants, and I did data collection over approximately 15 months. My participants were considered at risk because they were over the age of 26, and they'd transferred in fewer than 6 credits. And my rationale for choosing the 6 credits was because, and also that they had tested into a developmental English course. And my rationale for 6 credits was that they hadn't demonstrated academic competence at another university. So that's the parameters that I set for my participant pool. And after my interviews, I did some analysis of the themes and came up with five main themes. The first one was that students desire substantive feedback. Sometimes faculty report frustration because it feels like the students aren't paying attention to the feedback, they're not interested in the feedback, and that may be true for some students, but all the participants in this study said they were looking for feedback, that both positive and negative feedback was useful, and that also surprised me, but they said the negative feedback is helpful because it teaches me what I need to work on, but the positive feedback helps me because it tells me what I don't need to work on. And it seems so simple, but it was a little bit of a thunderbolt for me of the positive feedback tells them where they don't need to direct their energies any longer. Mm-hmm. And so for an adult student who's busy and buried in responsibilities, telling them this is a place you don't have to direct energy anymore is really
a sigh of relief.
A sigh of relief and really powerful. They really desired examples. Again, they had not demonstrated competence in academic writing at another university.
So they didn't know what it should look like.
They didn't know what it should look like, exactly. And so they were really anxious to get examples to look at. They wanted specific feedback. They had very harsh words for faculty members who just said, good job. That was not helpful to them at all, because it doesn't tell them, well, what piece was good and what piece needs improvement.
It wasn't constructive enough.
Exactly, or directive enough, yes. And then they really wanted faculty members to mark on the papers. And in Blackboard, there's a function where you can pull up the paper and drop comments in without having to download the paper and use track changes in Word and upload it. And students resoundingly said the faculty members who put those marks in the paper and showed them the exact sentence that was problematic or the exact word or exactly where the comma should go. And keep in mind, these students were all enrolled in the developmental English class at the time of the interview or had finished it the week before. And so they were the students who were getting feedback on, here's where you put a comma and this word needs to be capitalized. And they said the more that you marked on the paper, the more obvious it was to me what I needed to work on. The second theme was that students are proactive. This was really one of the themes that took me by surprise, in that they really look to friends and relatives a lot, especially if they feel like they're not getting adequate feedback from their faculty member. And so
that's an interesting point, that if you don't want them to get the wrong ideas, you better be more vocal.
Yes. And friends and relatives are great if those friends and relatives have adequate academic writing skill. But one participant said, my friend is a published author. She's my best resource. And that would be helpful up to a point. But a published creative author writing fiction, that's a completely different beast than writing for an academic paper.
That is true.
And so that resource could be harmful in some ways as the student is trying to get feedback about how to improve. They rely on Google even more than I thought. I mean, I knew they were looking at Google a lot, but I had no idea that if you don't provide them an exemplar of a good reflection paper,
they'll go find
They will Google how to do a reflection paper. And the academic administrator in me is, my chest gets a little tight when I think about that because, every university has a different approach to a reflection paper.
Yes.
And an example from another university may not be what the student needs. But again, if we're not providing examples of these papers, they will go find it themselves.
Right or wrong, they'll bring them in.
One student remarked that he could post to the student lounge that he needed help writing a APA cover page, or he could just wait until the faculty member got back to him, or he could just Google it, which is fine. I mean, an APA cover page should be a fairly easy search to get a good sample. Well, both of you are looking at me like, we all know there's a lot of bad cover pages out there. And the fact of the matter was, when I looked at his cover page, it was wrong. Yeah. So either he was using the wrong search terms, maybe he didn't put in their 6th edition when he was searching APA.
That could be.
Or maybe there were just a bunch of bad examples.
Personalized examples. Personalized APA is rampant out there. So, and I always tell my students, if I make a mistake, you can counter me with the book, and I'd be happy to change it.
Yep.
So, if you have a standard, then everybody can get along.
Yep. They do use the textbooks. The students remarked that the English textbook, the Bedford Handbook that we require, was very helpful to them, which surprised me because I know a lot of students, we get faculty who complain the students never bought the books. Well, these students at least were reporting, I bought the book. One student had rented it and told me she was looking for a used copy to buy because she knew she was going to use it for her other classes because it was so helpful. One student got so excited, she pulled her copy out of the tote bag and showed me, look at all the Post-it flags I have on here of all the pages that I've marked because I'm going to continue to use this as a resource. And so that warmed my heart to see that the students really were that we have chosen a resource that's actually helpful to our students.
That's good to hear, too.
It makes me wonder that students that have more academic experience think they know more.
Maybe, yeah.
And I'm wondering if the at-risk, or as you've defined them, are actually more open and teachable than some of the other adults that we have.
That's probably a good point.
That could be.
Yeah, because how many times have we all heard, well, this is the way I've always done it.
Right. Or I already know that. And they don't even listen to how you're saying, but I want you to do it this way.
Right.
So, but I've gotten you off track. Sorry
No,
about
that's
that.
all right. No worries. A third theme was that students are reflective. They do have something to prove. They've reflected on that. They come with deep wells of motivation. I want to show my kids that this can be done. One student said, my son wants to watch a fight with his dad on pay-per-view this weekend, and I've told him neither one of us get to watch the fight until we get our homework done.
Accountability there.
Yeah,
Nice.
they are motivated. One student just was miserable in their career choice, and it had been fine for a long time, and then one day it wasn't, and so it was time to make a change. And that's very motivating for adults, and so they've reflected on these motivations. They're ready to get to work. They do attempt to use the feedback. All of them said, I tried. And when I went and looked at their papers, because that was another piece of the research, was I looked at the paper, the pre-paper that they submitted at the beginning of the English class, and then I looked at the comments that were given to them, and then I looked at the post-paper. All of the students had attempted to make the changes. They may not have done it right. For instance, one student, her reference page had improved, but there were still several components that were wrong. But you could see evidence that she had attempted to make the changes and was making progress with her references page. So they were trying to use the feedback, and they also had a surprising level of awareness that academic writing is very different. All of them, well, I shouldn't say all, but most of the participants have to write in some form or fashion in their professional careers. One was a police officer who had to write reports. A couple of them were in the medical field. They had to write notes. They're writing all day long, but they're writing using professional jargon, abbreviations, in some cases incomplete sentences. You don't need to write a complete sentence on a patient's chart, for instance. And they were very aware that academic writing was going to be very different. And they all reported it as difficult. That was the language they used. It was going to be difficult.
But they had that awareness.
Yes.
And so that's why the feedback was so important.
Yes. And they came into it wanting the feedback.
That's part of that's refreshing to hear too, because one of the things that really frustrates me is providing consistent, the same feedback on the same mistakes, especially in just style in general, and you don't see any attempt to correct it. It's very frustrating to me.
But we can't let those few cloud us from the many that are wanting the feedback.
Right. And
we tend to do that.
But I do love to receive the emails from the some students. Thank you so much for pointing that out to me. I didn't realize I was doing it wrong. And those always make me feel good and feel good about, it took extra effort to do that. And it's a nice sense of accomplishment and reward to some degree. Personal satisfaction, I guess.
Which kind of goes into your fourth theme, that students are hindered by emotions and power. So just as teachers are when we give out feedback.
Yes. The students, like I said earlier, reported a lot of anxiety about writing, and they were acutely aware of the power differential. The faculty member has all the power. They determine the assignment, they determine when it's due, they determine the length, they determine what good quality looks like, and faculty determine what kind of feedback the student's going to get on that attempt. And they found that very frustrating, that they had no input about the kind of feedback that they were going to get and what would be helpful to them. And I think that goes back to some assumptions that we have, that adult students likely have prior experience, and that they have opinions about what they want from their educational career or their educational experience. And so when we're not asking them what kind of feedback would be helpful, they feel frustrated. They also reported very high levels of frustration, I would say frustration bordering on disdain, for faculty members that don't provide quality feedback or don't provide feedback at all. They've got no time for that. They really don't. They've put in the effort. They've submitted an assignment. They expect high quality feedback from their faculty.
So it doesn't matter if the faculty member is the best subject matter expert. It's the feedback and being able to communicate and engage with the student that matters most.
Yep.
And I think we can all probably identify with that. We've probably all had instructors in our undergrad and graduate work that have not provided feedback, especially on final papers. Most of the time you get a final grade with no feedback whatsoever. And that always frustrated me.
They also reported a lot of conflict about school. They have busy lives, they have a lot of responsibilities, and while they had these deep wells of motivation to do school, they also mentally had one foot out the door because there were so many other pressures on them that it felt like, as the researcher, that we had a small window of opportunity to prove to the students that this was going to be a worthwhile endeavor, and that if they were getting something from their education, if they were getting the feedback, if they could see improvement in their writing, if they were engaging with their faculty members in the discussion and learning something from that, then we would keep them. But there's all these competing interests in their lives. When I was 18 and went off to college, quitting was not an option because I had nothing else going on that I could turn to. I wasn't married. I didn't really, I had part-time jobs, but I didn't have a career path. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. And for our students, our adult students, their scenario is very different.
They have a lot of competing responsibilities.
Yes. And so there's a lot of pressure, and like I said, I think there's a window of time where we have to prove to the student that this is going to be worthwhile to them. And for some students, it's not. If they come to school and they discover that this really isn't what they want to do, I'm not saying that we have to make every effort to save every student and retain every student, because it may not be the best choice for them. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put our best foot forward and
right.
during that window of time and after to make sure that it is a worthwhile experience.
Because they may come back later when they don't have as much on their plate.
Right.
So that's
Right.
always an option.
Well, and one thing that we see, and this is outside of my dissertation, but we see this when we interact with students who their life is falling apart. And you'll say, why are you in school? Why are you adding school on top of the divorce or the cancer treatment or the, kids in chaos or whatever? And consistently we hear back from them, school is something I can control. School helps me to make sense of
all the chaos
of all the chaos. And so while we can't minimize the responsibilities and the pressures on adult students, we also shouldn't minimize the value to them. That aside from academic credits and a degree, this can also provide
It's like a support group.
Some support, some motivation, something to focus on.
A safe haven.
Yes, exactly.
From the standpoint of a director of faculty development, though, where do we cross that line? Because I have had students in there where I want to ask them, what are you doing here? You're just trying, you're barely I've had homeless students, students, as you said, that are terminally ill, things like that, and they really struggle with meeting assignments and not doing well. So where do we cross that path and say, have you thought about that this just isn't the right thing for you right now?
That's a tough one. I really don't know in the 5-week format that we have as faculty that we can develop enough of a relationship with a student to ask those questions. I think that probably their student advisor should be the one to ask them those questions and have those conversations, because they have that. There may be a few students that we can develop that kind of relationship with. I think our job as faculty is to continue to treat them like we would any other student, to provide them with resources and support,
encouragement when
we can, but to be careful not to enable. And to, for instance, bend university policy because the student's life story is so difficult. That's for the SSA and the vice president to sort out, and to look at each student's situation. But we need to operate on the assumption that as an adult student, they can make the best decision for their life.
That makes sense. So I'll stop doing that. No, I'm just kidding.
You have control issues.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, though. Because there are times when you want to stop and ask a student, is this the right thing for you right now?
But that can come across as patronizing.
Yeah, but I think the way you put it, Kristen, makes a lot of sense. We don't know all of their situation, and we're just a blip on their radar for a few weeks. So that is probably something that we need to just trust them to make the right decision, and they'll do as they think is best. And Beth, like you said, we need to encourage them.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job. I appreciate all you do, Beth.
Remember that when we get back to work.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I'm going to take that as compliment.
Yeah, you do that.
All right, where are we at here? I think number 5.
Oh, yeah. So the last theme was one of those thunderbolt situations. I was getting toward the end of the data analysis. I'm sure my neighbors thought I was crazy because periodically I would get up from my desk and do laps around the block with my ugly wool hat on. It was winter, ugly wool hat, muttering to myself. I was at the muttering to myself stage and the whole have I showered today stage. But it kind of occurred to me on one of my laps around the block that, we ask faculty every fall to complete a faculty satisfaction survey, and it runs the gamut of, are you getting appropriate communication? Do you feel like you get adequate support? Do you feel confident with the technology and the resources that we provide to help you with the technology, et cetera? And we asked a couple of questions on the faculty satisfaction survey of rank the students' writing problems. Tell us, are they good writers, and rank their problems. And then when I was going through the narratives from, the transcripts from my interviews, I realized that the students were reporting the 3 main problems were APA formatting, the flow and organization of thoughts, and mechanics. And then I looked at the results of the faculty satisfaction survey, and those were the top 3 for faculty as well. So faculty and students are all reporting that we have the same problems here, folks. And it just helped me to realize that there was a gap in our understanding. As faculty, there was a gap in their understanding as students. And that's a really great gap that I would love to explore some more of. Okay, faculty are reporting the same problems, students are reporting. Are we on the same page, though, about how to fix it? And are we on the same page of, here's our plan for helping you? Mm-hmm. And, students, here's what we expect. If you do these things, you will have improvement in these areas. And that, again, that's another 10 dissertations right there, just exploring that gap and how we help to fill it.
Sounds like a mind map and an outline in the making.
Multiple.
Well, when you're looking at that gap of understanding, you came up with a couple of basic questions that were most effective, that got the best results. One of those was, what do you like most about this course, and how can this course be improved? So that is along the lines with what you asked your faculty. You, in turn, asked these students this, right?
I asked them, it wasn't that broad. I was a little bit more specific. I asked them what kind of feedback is helpful to them. I asked them about what characteristics of the feedback were helpful. I got a lot of information from them about the characteristics of a faculty member who's effective. I didn't ask them a lot about the course content. And then the information about the textbook just came out organically from the interviews.
Okay.
That just kind of bubbled up to the surface. But on the course evaluations at the end of every class that we send out to the students, we do ask them those 2 questions. What did you like most about this course, and how can this course be improved? And the students, we require them to complete the survey before they can post their final assignment. So we have a very high response rate to those questions.
Might be a little aggravated, but it's a high response rate.
Well, and that's one thing that so I did an analysis of one 5-week block. I looked at all of the comments that came in from every course across every discipline and did a little analysis of some of the basic themes that emerged from that. And I would like to spend some more time. I'd like to go back and do more of that, because I think that the students are telling us, and this is kind of a no-brainer, but it's one of those things where I've never spent the time to actually do it. The students are telling us what good teaching looks like, how they define it, what measures they use, and it's all there in the course evaluations. And we just need to go in and mine it and then organize it, make some sense from it.
And we'll have you back to tell us about it.
Sure. Yes.
Did you notice
Next
the
week?
hesitation?
Yeah.
That's going to be a time-consuming task, I'm sure.
It would be, but I think it would be so valuable. You know, in the information that I shared in the faculty development seminar a few weeks ago, I said students value kindness. That came up over and over and over again, and they showed specific examples of what kindness looked like to them. She got back to me within 2 hours. She offered to pray with me. She told me she was sorry that I'd experienced this loss, or he told me that he was sorry that I experienced this loss. You know, they really value kindness, and that surprised me that was such a big theme in that group of discussion comments. Another thing, they have, again, no patience, no tolerance for a faculty member who doesn't provide good feedback. They really rip into faculty members that don't provide them with good feedback. And as the director of faculty development, that's very helpful information to me. It just reminds me, again, of this is something that we need to work with our faculty on. It's not just writing a good job in there. They have no patience for that.
They don't want a pat on the head.
No, they want specific, measurable feedback.
Okay. That's a good thing to remember.
And I think one thing that came out of my dissertation as well is, and this is kind of a working theory and again another area of research, but I suspect that they have trouble translating the feedback into actionable items.
That's a good point.
We use a lot of educational jargon in our feedback, and I don't know, and at CCU we really emphasize the use of rubrics. I wonder if they have trouble translating that into
They've gotten
something.
too vague and generalized.
Possibly, and it could be that our faculty members are using language that they just,
Academies.
Yes, we're used to using these terms, and for a student that means absolutely nothing to them, especially one who does not have prior experience at another university.
You had a point, and I'm talking to you, Jim, about how you were giving feedback on how to do APA.
Yeah. It was, a lot of times I'll post something simple like, and this is on a MLA style paper, missing the header. And I often wonder if a student even knows what I'm talking about. And so I've started to rephrase that to just be a little more clear of exactly what's missing. Because in most cases, I post that comment and it never gets fixed.
Well, in MLA, there's a header and the heading.
Right.
So different terms, unless you have those specified, that makes perfect sense.
And they may not know what it means.
And there's a part of me that gets frustrated, like, why does the student ask, or why doesn't the student Google it?
Right.
Well, I know from my research that sending them out into Google can have really negative results.
No telling what we might come up with.
That also brings up a point where some of the growing trend is to have a feedback bank and to have something that you can just pop into each one. But if you don't personalize it for that student, Jim and I had an experience along those lines. We were in the same class.
Oh, right.
A doctoral class. We ended up in different sections, but we had the same instructor.
Right.
So it became a game for us to check our feedback, and it would be identical. I mean...
But different grades.
And I could never understand it. I even emailed him for feedback and said, exactly what are you doing? Or what am I doing? Is it this or is it this? I got back a feedback, yes. So I get where these students are coming from is the frustration with the feedback.
But fess up, the real thing that frustrated you was that my grade was always higher than yours.
I wasn't going to go there.
And now we know the real problem.
Right. But it was kind of an eye-opener because based on the bio of this instructor, he has taught for years and years and years at a very prominent university at the doctoral level.
Right.
And it's obvious he's using a feedback bank, but it was not personalized. And we got the same feedback.
And the individual papers were not marked, so I couldn't see where any differences might be.
And it's no wonder he could handle so many classes, to be honest.
I was at first very impressed on how quickly he got his grading done.
Right. We'd turn in an assignment on Sunday morning, have a grade by noon.
By Monday at noon.
When it was due Sunday night.
Yeah.
No, Sunday. I got grades back on Sunday.
Oh, that's true.
I mean, it was crazy. But now we know, we look at it and say, it wasn't that great of an experience as a student.
And it was based purely on our perception of the feedback.
Right. So it just feeds right into what you're talking about. We have experienced it ourselves.
Right.
Well, and I think,
And we're not at risk.
well, but, the truth of the matter is that it all goes back to we're adult students. And we
Exactly.
have expectations.
We do.
And we come in with a certain set of assumptions of how it's going to be. And when it doesn't meet those, we're gonna walk. So
Yeah. And we did understand, we do this for a living, so we saw it from a different perspective,
Sure.
and we took that into consideration too.
sure.
We just both ended up dropping the course. I mean, to say that, to be honest about it.
We answered that feedback with our dollars.
Yeah, we did.
So
Well, and I think as the director of faculty feedback, or as the director of faculty development, one of the things, and I mentioned this before, is helping faculty members to figure out how to manage their time and where to focus their energy. And so we've talked about feedback banks, and that is a great time saver, but you have to be thoughtful about it. You can't just dump the same comment in every week on the same problem. The student's going to be, that kind of repetition, it probably didn't make sense to them the first time. So why would you try and use that same comment in week 2 and week 3 and week 4?
And do you think that can train them not to even read the feedback?
That is one question that I have is if, first of all, if they're not getting feedback, then they assume that their writing is fine. And it's as simple as that. If they don't get feedback, they assume that their writing is fine. I think that's a reasonable assumption. And so if their writing is fine, and that, especially in the first couple of courses, they're not getting a lot of feedback, why would they continue to check? Why would they continue to work on that? And I think sometimes if the feedback is general and they can't turn it into an actionable item, they have said, the students in my study said they ask questions. If they don't understand the feedback, they will ask questions. But there's also that anxiety piece, and they're having to be vulnerable with a faculty member. They're having to risk by contacting that faculty member. And one of the participants just said, the feedback that I got when I asked for clarification just didn't help me at all, and I gave up. And I think for at-risk students, that's going to be a higher risk with them, is that they may be more likely to give up if they don't get help and the kind of help that they think they need as quickly as we can.
So like you said earlier, they want to know faculty care. And if faculty is not willing to help them, that tells the student that the faculty does not care.
And that also is, the student is bringing a lot of assumptions to that scenario too. Our faculty have the same pressures, the same time constraints, the same responsibilities. And so I think there's a lot of assumptions there that need to be kind of exposed on both sides. So,
And do you think in the online environment there is an element of anonymity
for
that
sure.
plays into that as well?
Sure.
Okay.
And when you email a faculty member and you don't get a response for 4 days, very few people are assuming they must have something terrible going on in their life.
That's not their first assumption.
No, their first assumption is they're lazy, I'm paying all this money, and I'm not getting what I need. And they're, especially when you're dealing with a power differential and the faculty member has all the power, the student's default setting is not going to be to extend grace.
No.
Generally.
That's our job.
Yes. And so I think, they go into it kind of with some assumptions that, I see periodically on the student surveys, it took the faculty member 8 hours to get back to me.
Horrors.
They had to sleep. Oh my goodness.
Yes, and those comments are not common, but we need to help students understand the life pressures that you're experiencing are the very same pressures that your faculty members are experiencing. Maybe not to the same degree. Not all of our faculty members have young children at home,
Right.
But I know a lot of our faculty members have aging parents, or they're in the sandwich generation. They're caring for children and caring for aging parents.
Right.
And so helping students to understand that we're all on the same page in a lot of ways.
But it has to be done in such a way that it doesn't sound like an excuse.
Exactly, and that's a balancing act, and I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Would that be something along the lines of proactive feedback as far as, I understand your position, I'm right there with you in the trenches, and so that can kind of help bridge that gap, give them some heads up feedback that I understand. So,
Well, and I think it goes back to one of my earlier points. We need to start asking students what's going to be helpful to them. Flat out, up front, what are your biggest concerns with your writing? I can help with that. If I think taking that step, and I haven't tried it myself yet. The classes that I've been teaching lately haven't been really conducive to that. But I think it would be worthwhile to ask the students, what are your biggest anxieties about writing? What areas can I help you with? I'm not saying throw out the grading rubric. I'm not saying throw out the basic things that you're going to cover every time. But the students reported that they wanted to be involved in a shared dialogue with their faculty. They also reported a lot of frustration that they got feedback about grammar, spelling, mechanics, punctuation, and no feedback about their ideas. Some of that, I think, is because they were enrolled in developmental English classes.
True.
Right.
The bulk of their feedback was going to be about those mechanical things that need to be mastered before they can go on to other courses.
but they do need to have their ideas valued.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think as faculty members, our default setting is to get kind of hung up on, APA and grammar and spelling and, your thesis statement, and not looking at the big picture idea of what was the student talking about here. And our adult students have a tendency to share a lot of what's going on in their life, and we need to respond to that.
Right.
They're vulnerable. They've exposed these parts of their lives. They've taken the risk, and to not respond to that and not acknowledge that is, I think, really devaluing to them.
I had a paper submitted last week or before the break, and it was just a very short, the absolute first reflection paper on things that led to their decision to go to school. And a student just poured her heart out on tragic life that she had leading up to it. But she never really got to the point of the question. And so in my feedback, I said, I want to be sensitive to your experience. However, you never quite got to the point of answering the question in this reflection. And she sent me an email yesterday, which I have not responded to yet, saying that she appreciated my comments and kind of explaining it a little bit further. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to give this time, too, to think about a proper response back to her.
Yeah.
Because it was a very real world, I would not even mention it here, but it was heartbreaking. And I don't want to diminish that in any way. But I was trying to extend to her, but you have to be more clear and direct in answering the prompt of the assignment. But that puts me in a tough spot.
Yes.
And I think all of us listening to this podcast can identify with that sometimes.
I think many times faculty are put in some tough spots because we have students from all over the world, different cultures, different expectations and assumptions. And sometimes what we feel is maybe being belligerent on not just having tragic instances that are diverting them from the real point of what they're supposed to be writing about. Sometimes as adults, they can be a little, well, let me say, I've noticed that different regions of the United States have different ways of approaching.
More direct.
I have a good friend from Boston, and she is very direct. And then I have another friend from the South that it takes her forever to get to the point. So as far as classroom management, that's something that we need to address online because you are now addressing a bigger pool of cultural communication.
Big diversity.
I like to frame it in helping this, and I had a conversation with a student last night about this, of assuming a professional tone and helping the students to learn what that is. So it takes into account their life experience, it takes into account their career experience, where I'm coaching you to assume a professional tone in your interactions with me and with your classmates. So far, that's worked pretty well. Students haven't taken offense at that. Students haven't really pushed back on how can you say that to me. The conversation I had with the student was this is a learning process for both of us of how do we interact with each other on a professional level.
I, for one, have certainly had to learn to soften my tone because I tend to be very direct as well. Not that Jim would understand that.
Well, and she answered as the director of faculty development.
Yeah. But
I'm just teasing.
it does play into, because if you don't watch your tone and have that professional, it can escalate almost to what they might term as cyberbullying. And that kind of scenario gets very tough once that ball gets rolling.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, and it's not that you intended anything like that, but they took it that way, so then they push back even harder.
Oh, my. Yeah, that was a big learning experience. I had gotten real slammed when I thought I was just being direct and simple. I was trying to give as simple a feedback for actionable steps that I could without, and to me, I didn't think it was harsh, but they were from a different culture, and it came off as harsh to them. And so this professional tone still needs to be a little light. Because as academics, we can get a little elitist sounding sometimes.
I think go ahead.
I was going to say, my supervisor is the vice president of academic administration, and she handles all of the formal student complaints. And she said this in the professional seminars just a few weeks ago, that the vast majority of student complaints that she gets, and she doesn't get a whole lot of them, but when they come in, the problem has been that the faculty member has made assumptions about the student's situation or motivation or life experience that may or may not have been true, but the student felt judged. And so Dr. Sherling has said to the faculty, stick to the facts. One faculty member said, I think if you just tried a little bit harder. Well, we don't know how hard the student's trying.
Yeah,
right.
And those kinds of comments are what send students into a tizzy because we don't know their life and they feel judged. And that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. And so sticking to the facts, helping the student. Some students you're not going to de-escalate. Very few students escalate to that point, but there's just some that are not going to de-escalate, and there's, the university has procedures to handle that. But for the majority of the students who get flustered, who get upset, helping to kind of redirect them back to, I'd like to have a professional conversation with you, avoiding those types of comments where they are going to be perceived as judged. Avoiding those assumptions about the student and their life circumstances, those will go a long way toward helping you avoid those conflicts.
And when you put that into the feedback, then it's helpful, not hurtful.
Well, and I try to frame my feedback as to increase your grade for next week, focus on these 3 things. Or I would have liked to have seen taking a coaching tone, I think helps a lot.
That's a good way to put it.
Rather than a parenting tone.
Yes.
That could be a good frame of mind.
A judge and jury kind of dun dun dun. Because the student, whatever your feedback is, I think when the student gets ready to open the paper and look at the feedback, what they're hearing in their mind is dun dun dun.
Yeah,
They have anxiety, they've been vulnerable, they feel this power differential. As a doctoral student, when I was getting ready to open up my papers from my professors, there was this kind of clenching in my stomach and, this kind of,
my whole future relies on this.
Well, because it goes to your identity.
Yeah.
And one student in my study said it very clearly. She didn't intend to. I'm confident that this just kind of came out as a part of the conversation. But what she said was my writing good and am I good? It goes to your identity. You have been vulnerable. You've put yourself out there. Even if you're not writing about personal topics,
right.
These are your efforts. This is your time. This is your brain energy. You're making yourself vulnerable to these faculty members.
It's a creative act, and anytime we do create something, we want it to be, it's a reflection of us.
Exactly. It goes to your identity. And when a student or any adult, anyone feels like their identity is being challenged or their identity is being judged, there's there's some negative emotions that come from that.
Yep.
That might be a good place to wrap it up because that really puts the emphasis on how important what we do is, the influence that we have on our students. And we may not see it or really recognize it, but that very thing highlights the fact that we something we say in our feedback, whether it be a positive thing or a negative thing, may have a huge impact on a student and how they view themselves. And I think we do need to step back and really think about how am I communicating the feedback to our students? Am I being fair? Am I doing it in an objective way and not in a way that could be taken as a personal attack on their beliefs or the example of, I would like to see you try a little harder.
Oh yeah, that's don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's just it sometimes, there are some things that are said like what we're talking about here that just really take me aback, and I have to step back and pause.
That's when I switch my feedback to a question. I said, have you considered this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I know I have some assumptions coming in here, and I just want to nail this student because they keep doing this wrong. So I start asking more and more questions in my feedback. Instead of saying, you need to do this, I would say, have you considered this?
Yep.
And that softens it.
It works in providing feedback. It also works in awkward family political conversations. As we're just coming out of Thanksgiving and heading into Christmas.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right, speaking of that, let's
We can practice our feedback with our family.
I got a couple that I can think of. Well, Dr. Wall, we sure appreciate you taking the time to sit with us.
my
I think
pleasure.
we spent probably longer than you figured. But these kind of conversations have a tendency to just keep going and going, and I think we could continue this. But we sure appreciate the efforts that just your doctoral thesis, and then when you presented it to us as faculty, I thought it was very valuable, and that's what led us to ask to sit down and talk to you.
I'm glad.
Because I think our listeners will appreciate some of the comments that have come out of your dissertation
There's
as
been
well.
a lot of gems.
Good. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
no doubt.
I appreciate that.
So we look forward to hearing feedback, and I'll make sure and send you a link
Okay.
to
Great.
the podcast so you can spread it to all the affiliate faculty. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.
It was my
Thank you.
pleasure.
Well, there you have it. I found our conversation with Dr. Wall to be very interesting, especially when we consider the tone of our feedback and how it can enhance or detract from the things that we say to our students when it comes to helping them to be better students, improve their writing, and things like that. So with that, take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Professional Adjunct Podcast. Please visit our website at www.professionaladjunct.com. There you can subscribe to our podcast and share your comments, questions, and ideas. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, too.
See you next week.